I knew things were changing the moment Jared Kincaid dropped the word synergy unironically during his first company meeting. That smug two-button suit-wearing MBA graduate came strutting in like he just invented capitalism, rather than inheriting a corner office from the man who used to call me the spine of this place. I have seen startup bosses come and go, but this one had the confidence of a man who has never had to earn his parking spot. 22 years. That is how long I have been with Kincaid Systems. I joined back when our servers were held together with duct tape and hope, and our marketing team was just whoever could make a decent presentation. I was there before we got the funding rounds, before we outgrew 2 office buildings, and long before anyone had ever heard of Jared. The founder, Lawrence Kincaid himself, built this company from a folding table in a rented storage unit. He used to tell me that processes make permanence, and I made sure every process had a paper trail, a timestamp, and a backup. When you have been somewhere long enough, you stop needing a title to know your worth. Technically, I was Chief Operations Liaison. Internally, I was the person you called when procurement stalled, compliance panicked, or legal forgot which version of the charter we were using. I kept the whole machine running without ever needing to raise my voice. Then Lawrence got sick. He started fading about a year ago. Quietly at first, missed meetings, forgotten names, odd silences. He still had moments of clarity, but the board got nervous. And nervous boards do foolish things, like handing the company over to Jared, Lawrence's wet-nosed nephew, who once asked if we could just generate compliance reports with artificial intelligence. I wish I were kidding. From the second Jared set foot in the office with his polished loafers and fake humility, I knew I had a countdown running over my head. He made a speech about modernizing legacy systems while never once looking me in the eye. His eyes, for the record, were usually glued to his phone, scrolling through social media. I started noticing things. My calendar permissions got restricted. People I had mentored were suddenly copying me on emails instead of inviting me to the meetings. And I overheard him in the hallway telling human resources that I had museum energy. Here is the thing about being underestimated. It gives you time. Quiet time. The kind where you revisit old files, pull up those dusty documents nobody has opened since 2011, and remember every handshake that ever meant something. Lawrence and I had an understanding. He trusted me to safeguard the company's foundation, and buried in those foundations were some very old, very real clauses with very sharp teeth. But I did not fight the shift. I let him replace our vendor liaison with his college friend. I watched him convert our internal reference guides into a chat channel. I even smiled when he rolled out casual dress days like it was a new federal holiday. But what I all did was quietly renew my notary license, dust off a certain 24-page document signed by Lawrence in 2011, and begin logging every interaction with human resources into a private email folder. I knew the final blow would come suddenly. Jared did not have the spine for confrontation. He was more the type to schedule a meeting at 7:30 in the morning and bring coffee to make himself look good, so I waited. And, while I waited, I made sure every piece of paper he had never read was in order. Every clause he would have mocked had been verified. Every signature was notarized. I was not planning revenge. I was preserving structure. The structure he was too arrogant to understand. Because here is what Jared never learned in business school. The person who understands the foundation holds the power to shake the entire house. And I was about to shake it. I knew that the corporate structure we built was designed to outlast simple greed, but Jared only saw dollar signs and quick exits. He talked about positioning the firm for a 10-figure buyout within 2 years, ignoring the fact that our core clients stayed with us because of the personal relationships we had nurtured for over 2 decades. To him, clients were just lines on a spreadsheet, assets to be leveraged, or expenses to be trimmed. He did not understand that trust is a currency that takes 22 years to build and only 10 seconds to destroy. I watched him dismiss the concerns of our senior engineers when they warned him that rushing our system migration would lead to catastrophic downtime. He simply waved them off, stating that modern platforms did not suffer from legacy constraints. He was living in a world of slides and pitch decks, while I was anchored to the reality of copper wires, database logs, and federal compliance standards. I knew our system was vulnerable, not to technology, but to arrogance. And that vulnerability was exactly what I had documented, cataloged, and sealed. Every meeting where he bypassed board protocols, every email where he instructed compliance officers to look the other way, and every memo where he declared that older policies were no longer applicable. I kept it all, not out of malice, but because Lawrence had taught me that in the corporate world, if it is not documented, it never happened. And if it is documented, it is eternal. So I let him play his games, let him rearrange the desks, and let him tell the younger staff that the old guard was just holding them back. I stood in the shadow of his spotlight, holding the blueprints to the entire stage. And I was just waiting for the curtain to rise on his final act. It happened at 7:59 in the morning on a Tuesday. Because of course it did. Only a coward picks a time. Before most people have even poured their first cup of coffee. I was still locking my car in the garage when I saw the meeting invite pop up. The subject line was simple, reading as a quick synchronization, and the location was set for Human Resources Conference Room B. It was sent at 7:56, giving me exactly 3 minutes of notice. No context, no preparation, just vibes. Jared was already there when I walked in, legs crossed, sipping some green juice from a glass jar, like he had just emerged from a yoga retreat in a technology cult. Human Resources Director Sylvia Cole sat beside him like a hostage, pretending her makeup could conceal the dread in her eyes. I gave her a nod. She did not return it. Jared did not waste time. "Gerald," he said, like the name tasted sour in his mouth. "We have been evaluating our organizational strategy, and after a lot of difficult discussions, we have decided to sunset your role as part of our modernization initiative." He actually smiled when he said that, the absolute child. "Sunset," he said, like I was a failed email campaign. I blinked once, that was it. No tears, no gasps. I just tilted my head the way you do when a child proudly presents you with a drawing of a monster that is clearly just a squiggle with eyes. I did not need to hear the rest, but he gave it anyway. "We really appreciate your historical contributions," he added, dragging out the word historical like I was a fossil he had found in a filing cabinet. "It is important to stay relevant in today's corporate landscape. Consider this your final lesson." I smiled tight-lipped, no teeth, no words. I just stood up, picked up my leather folder, and walked out. I did not even bother taking the travel mug I had brought. I just left it on the table. The walkout felt like the longest, slowest parade I had ever marched in. The colleagues I had mentored and supported for years averted their eyes as if I had become contagious. The elevator ride down to the lobby was blessedly empty. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I got into my car, shut the door, and took a deep, slow breath. I did not scream. I did not panic. I simply opened my banking application, confirmed that my final paycheck had been deposited, and clicked approval. That timestamp was critical. It was exactly 8:15 in the morning. My next stop was the notary public office 3 blocks away. I had the official letter already printed, sealed, and labeled for the immediate review of the board's legal counsel. All it needed was the seal. The notary raised an eyebrow when she read the first page, but she did not ask questions. She signed it, pressed the heavy seal into the paper, and slid it back across the counter. Then came the courier service. I had prepared the package 2 weeks ago, labeling it as a time-sensitive legal document. I instructed the driver that he must secure a signature on delivery, but only from the general counsel, Diane Thornton. No substitutes. No human resources staff, no executive assistants, and absolutely not Jared. The driver nodded, climbed into his van, and pulled out into the morning traffic. I sat in my car, parked across the street from the office building, and watched through the tinted windows. An hour later, I saw Jared leave the building, laughing with his new hires. What Jared did not know was that the letter now in transit contained more than just a formal farewell. It was a formal notice of termination acknowledgement, executed by me, the party of the second part, pursuant to Section 8.4 of the 2011 Operational Reversion Agreement. That agreement was a document so old that even the current legal department had forgotten its existence. But I had not. I had helped Lawrence draft that charter when we first incorporated the business. He was paranoid back then, terrified that the board might someday be swayed by family ties or smooth-talking executives instead of competence. So, We wrote safeguards, legal tripwires, and checks buried so deep they were practically invisible. But I kept copies in triplicate, stored securely in 2 physical locations and 1 encrypted drive. The reversion clause stated that if I were ever terminated without unanimous board approval, and a severance package that complied with the original charter terms, operational control of Kincaid Systems would revert within 96 hours to the founder's trust and to the specific appointee listed within it. Jared had just pulled the pin on his own career. He still thought I was just historical, a legacy employee who could be swept away to make room for his friends. But he was about to learn that the foundations of this company were not built on sand. They were built on contracts, and contracts have a way of outlasting the people who sign them. I started my car and drove home, watching the city streets fade behind me. I had done my job, and now it was time to let the mechanism we had built do its work. The 96-hour clock had started, and there was nothing Jared could do to stop it. He was too busy planning his next meeting, too busy congratulating himself on his decisive action, to notice the cracks that were already forming under his feet. I parked in my driveway, walked inside, and made a fresh cup of black coffee. It was going to be a long week, and I wanted to be awake for every single minute of it. By Wednesday morning, Jared was celebrating his triumph. He posted a digital image of a broom sweeping in the main company communication channel, accompanied by a caption that read, "Spring cleaning, out with the old." A few of his newly hired managers reacted with fire emojis, and others added virtual clapping hands. I knew this because a former colleague forwarded the message to my personal phone. Loyalty is a curious thing. It does not disappear just because you are no longer on the payroll. From his corner office, which had recently been remodeled with expensive modern furniture, Jared strutted around like he had just achieved a major corporate victory. He ordered a catered lunch of fancy salads and healthy drinks for his executive team, celebrating my departure with a speech about removing legacy friction. He even distributed a new organizational chart printed in a modern font, calling it the future of the company. I was not surprised. Jared had all the emotional depth of a damp paper towel. What I was counting on was his arrogance. It was the same arrogance that made him shrug off the legal memo his assistant slid onto his desk that afternoon. My sources told me the assistant had warned him that the legal department was flagging something in the old governance files regarding my departure. Jared had simply laughed, telling her that they had sunsetted those old clauses years ago and that compliance could run in circles if they wanted to do so. But they had not sunsetted anything. I had personally ensured that the reversion clause remained active, recertified, and notarized during every compliance audit for the last 10 years. Most of the current employees were not around in 2011. They did not know how deep the founder's paranoia ran, or that I was the one who helped design the legal framework to protect the firm from someone exactly like Jared. It was not about revenge. It was about protecting the business we had spent decades building. Meanwhile, the courier had delivered the package to General Counsel Diane Thornton. The envelope bore my personal notary stamp, the same seal Lawrence and I had used when we first filed our incorporation paperwork. Inside was the notarized execution notice, cross-reference with the board charter, and a copy of Lawrence's trust directive. The legal language was absolute. It stated that, in the event Gerald Vance was involuntarily terminated without documented cause, and if the termination failed to meet the notification standards outlined in Article 8.4, operational oversight would revert to the founder's trust. The control would transfer to the trust's appointed successor within 96 hours, barring a unanimous board override signed by the founder himself. They had no override, and Lawrence had not signed a document in 11 months. Jared was completely oblivious. He even posted a video of himself on the office balcony with a caption about making room for innovation. He did not know that Diane Thornton was already instructing her staff to dig through the physical binders in the basement archives, looking for the original signed agreements. Back at my house, I did not celebrate. I did not pour a drink. I pulled out a yellow paper pad and wrote down the timeline. The termination occurred on Tuesday at 7:59 in the morning. The notary seal was applied at 8:30. The courier was dispatched at 9 o'clock. By noon, The package was marked as delivered and signed for by the General Counsel. I had a perfect paper trail, tracking confirmations, and a recorded message to my attorney. That evening, Diane Thornton sent me a brief email asking me to confirm if I had executed the reversion clause. I replied with a single word: executed. By Thursday, 3 days after my departure, Jared's spring cleaning had expanded. He fired 4 other senior managers, all of whom had been with the company since the early growth years. The head of vendor relations was gone, the payroll manager was dismissed, and Patricia Briggs, who had built our client onboarding system from scratch, was escorted out of the building. Patricia had been a close friend. She had helped me through some of my toughest times at the company, and seeing her treated like security risk was infuriating. In their place, Jared hired his college roommate, Dustin Miller, as the new chief strategy architect, despite the fact that Dustin had no background in technology. Another friend, Travis Stone, was named the head of organizational vibes. The internal systems immediately began to show signs of strain. Our key clients were calling, confused by the sudden changes in personnel and the lack of communication. I received message after message from frustrated engineers who were being forced to implement half-baked software changes by managers who did not understand our architecture. One analyst apparently told Dustin that the new strategy was concerning, only to be told that he needed to have a cleaner mindset. I sat at my desk at home, sipping my coffee, and watched the internal updates roll in. I received a copy of a spreadsheet showing our projected cash flow for the third quarter. It still had my formulas, my color coding, and my personal notes in the margins, but the top row had been replaced with a label stating it was optimized by Jared. The man could not even write a basic spreadsheet formula, yet he was claiming credit for years of my work. But the countdown was entering its final phase, and Jared was too busy planning a company rebranding event to notice. He was planning to announce the new Kincaid systems under a tagline about having no baggage. That line was not going to age well. I checked my watch. The 96 hours were ticking away, and the board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. The stage was set, and Jared was walking right into the trap he had built for himself. The Monday board meeting was supposed to be a routine affair. It was scheduled for a quick update, a few slides on our third quarter metrics, and some performance charts from the new team Jared had established. It was the kind of meeting where the board members usually nodded politely while checking their phones under the table. Instead, it became the moment the ice finally broke under Jared's feet. He started the meeting with a standing presentation, pacing back and forth as if he were presenting a revolutionary new product. He wore a casual sweater and jeans, trying to project the image of a visionary leader. "Team," he said, gesturing to the screen, "we are shaking things up. No more legacy drag. We are lean, we are fast, and we are Kincaid Tech." The board members smiled thinly, but Diane Thornton, the general counsel, did not join them. She was flipping through a thick folder on her desk, her face pale. She stopped on a page about halfway through and went completely still. Jared, caught up in his own speech about vertical integration and growth strategy, did not notice. Diane finally raised her hand to interrupt. "Sorry," she said, "but a document arrived over the weekend. It is notarized, time-stamped, and was delivered by a legal courier." Jared waved his hand dismissively. "If it is more complaints from Gerald, I already told Human Resources to disregard it." Diane did not look away. "It is not something we can ignore," she said, her voice dropping. The room went quiet. Margaret Sinclair, the board chair, leaned forward. "Is there a legal issue, Diane?" Diane adjusted her glasses and tapped the document. "Potentially a very serious one. I need to call a recess to review the validity of a corporate charter clause referenced here." Jared laughed, a loud, forced sound. "Diane, we updated all the governance documents during our last audit. I was told we modernized everything." Diane looked at him. "We updated the templates, Jared, not the core governing charter. This clause is part of the original agreement signed when the company was incorporated, and it was officially reaffirmed during our compliance review in 2020. It was signed by Lawrence Kincaid and the board." Margaret Sinclair frowned, looking at the papers. "Which clause is in question?" Diane turned the page. "Section 8.4 of the Operational Reversion Agreement. It states that if Gerald Vance is terminated without documented cause and without a board-approved severance package, operational control of the company reverts to the founder's trust. Jared stood up, his face reddening. That is ridiculous. Gerald was a liaison, not an executive. You are telling me some old piece of paper can undo my decisions? No one laughed. Diane closed the folder. The agreement is legally binding, Jared, and because the severance terms were not met, and the board was not notified in writing prior to the termination, the reversion clock has been ticking. We are already 68 hours into the 96-hour period. We have exactly 28 hours before operational control of Kincaid's systems automatically transfers to the trustee's named successor. The boardroom erupted into hushed whispers. One of the senior board members, who had known Lawrence for years, leaned back in his chair. If this is valid, we are facing a massive governance crisis. We cannot have control of a 10-figure corporation shifting without our input. Jared tried to regain control of the room. Look, this is just a desperate move by a former employee who is mad about being let go. She was always dramatic. But the board members were not listening to him anymore. They were looking at Diane. Margaret Sinclair tapped her pen on the table, a sharp, steady sound that silenced the room. Diane, how long do you need to verify this? I need 45 minutes in a quiet room with the original documents from the safe, Diane replied. Margaret stood up. The board is in recess for 45 minutes. Let us get some answers. The meeting broke up, chairs scraping against the carpet. Jared stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the parking lot. He was trying to look calm, but I knew him well enough to know he was panicking. He had spent his entire life assuming that rules were for other people, that his family connection and his degree made him untouchable. He had treated my 22 years of service as nothing more than a hurdle to be cleared, a relic to be discarded. But now he was realizing that the corporate structure he wanted to run was built on the very documents he had ignored. He had assumed I would leave quietly, that I would accept my termination and disappear. He did not know that I had spent the last 2 weeks making sure every detail of the reversion agreement was perfect. He did not know that Diane Thornton was about to find the original notarized copy, with my signature and Lawrence's, sitting in the central archive. I sat at my kitchen table, checking my phone as the updates came in from a contact inside the building. The recess had begun, and the clock was still ticking. 28 hours left. The house was starting to shake, and Jared was beginning to realize that he did not know how to hold it together. I took another sip of my coffee and waited. The next move was mine, and I was ready. The boardroom was even colder when the meeting reconvened. It was not a physical chill, but rather the quiet dread that fills a room when everyone realizes a disaster is inevitable. Jared returned 10 minutes late, an iced coffee in his hand and his sunglasses resting on his head, attempting to project confidence. But the cracks in his composure were obvious. General Counsel Diane Thornton stood at the table, holding 2 folders and a sealed envelope that had not been opened since it was placed in the trust safe in 2019. The envelope had been signed by Lawrence Kincaid, 2 witnesses, and a notary. Margaret Sinclair, the board chair, wasted no time. Diane, what are your findings? Diane remained standing. The clause in question, Section 8.4 of the Operational Reversion Agreement, is valid. It was reaffirmed during the 2020 compliance cycle and was signed by Lawrence and 2 prior board members. The agreement is clear. If violated, it triggers a 96-hour reversion period. We are already 3 days into that window, with only 18 hours remaining. Jared rolled his eyes. Come on, Diane. That clause was just symbolic. It was never meant to be enforced in a real business scenario. Diane did not blink. It is entirely enforceable, Jared. The severance terms were not met, the board was not notified, and the founder's trust holds final authority. Unless we can produce a signed update to the trust, which we cannot, we are bound by the terms last filed. Jared stood up, pacing. This is ridiculous. You cannot just remove a chief executive officer because of some old paperwork. One of the senior board members finally spoke. Jared, you fired the person who wrote the charter with the founder and assumed there would be no consequences. That was not just paperwork, it was a trap, and you walked right into it. Jared turned to Diane. Why was this not flagged sooner? Diane was calm. I sent you an email a week before the termination suggesting a legacy document audit. You replied with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. Margaret Sinclair sighed. So what happens when the clock runs out? Diane opened the sealed envelope. The appointee listed in the trust will assume operational control of Kincaid's systems. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, read the name, and went still. She did not read it aloud. She simply passed it to Margaret. Margaret's eyes widened, and she passed it to the next board member. One by one, the sheet made its way around the room. Jared's voice cracked. Can someone just read the name? Margaret turned to him. The appointee is Gerald L. Vance. Jared stumbled back, his coffee spilling slightly. What? No, that is not possible. Gerald was just operations. He was trusted, Diane said. Jared ran a hand through his hair, letting out a dry laugh. You are telling me I fired the person who is now legally in control of this company? Margaret nodded. That is exactly what you did. We can vote to override it, right? Jared asked, desperate. No override is possible without the founder's written consent, Diane interrupted. And since Lawrence is under medical care, only the authorized trust representative can access the files or contact him. That representative is Gerald Vance. He was granted those privileges in 2023. The room went silent. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder. There were only 11 hours left before the 96-hour window closed, and I had not returned any of Jared's calls. He had left 8 messages, his tone shifting from arrogant to desperate. I let them all go to voicemail. At exactly 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, the 96 hours expired. The board was already gathered in the room, their papers lined up. The door opened and I walked in, wearing a sharp black suit and my old company badge. I walked to the head of the table. Every eye followed me. I did not smile, and I did not look at Jared. I sat down and connected my flash drive to the table port. The screen on the wall came to life, displaying a company-wide message about continuity, stability, and respect for our founding principles. It did not need my name. Everyone already knew what had happened. Margaret Sinclair looked at the table. Gerald Vance has assumed operational oversight under Section 8.4, effective immediately. She turned to Diane. Legal agreement? Diane nodded. The clause is executed. The chain of command has officially shifted. Margaret faced the board members, all in favor of entering this change into the records. Hands rose one by one, all opposed. No one moved. Jared stood in the corner, his voice shaking. You cannot do this. This is my company. I did not look up from my screen. Security officers entered the room, standing near the door. Don't bother, Jared said, his voice cracking. I am leaving. He looked at me. You think you won this? I finally looked at him and smiled. It was not a smile of anger, but one of absolute certainty. Jared, I said softly, nepotism is cute until it hits the charter. He froze, then took the paper I held out to him. It was his separation agreement, already signed by the board. As he took it, I leaned in slightly. Consider that your final lesson. You are the real executors of the office. Thanks for watching. Click that subscribe button, or the company might just forget your next contract.